What's going on, everybody?
You can do other things and you can explore different aspects of yourself and you can become a different person.
You can't use your voice, lift someone else's voice up.
Understand that you are a global citizen and you do have a responsibility.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Life Outside the Box podcast. I'm Abby.
I'm Asante.
And we have a very special guest on the podcast today. We're welcomed by Bänoo. And today we're talking about being uncomfortable, power of poetry, and creating change. Bänoo, I guess we'll just, kick it right off. Can you give us and our audience just a little introduction of who you are, what you do, why you're here?
Oh, wow. What a question. This question can be answered in so many different ways. But who I am Bänoo Zan, and I'm a poet and a writer. And sometimes I also collaborate with musicians. So I can say I'm a songwriter and a librettist as well. I'm an essayist as well. But I've also been an English professor, an English teacher for most of my life in Iran as well as in Canada. So I used to teach at universities and different English schools in Iran. And here in Canada, I've been teaching at colleges and different places. And I was born in Iran and I lived most of my life in Iran. And I immigrated to Canada. And why am I here? Why did I immigrate? Good question. I wasn't planning to immigrate. I was one of those people who love Iran very much. And one of the biggest, you might say, nightmares and fears that I had was there may come a day that I may have to leave Iran. But my sister applied. My sister was very much in love with Canada. So she applied for immigration and then asked me, why don't you apply? A few months after she did. So I said, okay, I will. When the time comes, then I will decide. If they accept me, that's when I will decide. I don't have to decide before that. It took 5.5 years for the Canadian immigration officials to process the application. By the time, because my sister had applied before me, her application was rejected and mine was accepted. So here I am and she is back in Iran. Very soon after I landed in Canada, because I was always interested in writing and I studied English literature back home and I taught English literature at universities. Anything from a survey of history of English literature to literary criticism to literary figures of speech, different genres, fiction, drama, poetry, and even things like literary translation. So when I arrived, I was very much interested in finding places where writers gathered. And very soon I found poetry gatherings, and from one to the next, and I explored probably hundreds in the first 2 years after I landed, and I kept exploring. But after that, I also started a reading series, a poetry reading series, an open mic, which I call Shab Sher, means poetry night. Shab means night, Sher means poetry, both in Arabic and Persian. It's for the greatest part of the time that I was running it, it was in Toronto. Now I'm running it in Alberta, in Edmonton. So I call it Canada's most diverse poetry and open mic series, most diverse and brave, because it operates based on two principles that no other reading series ever under the sun operate based on these two principles. One is diversity, but the other one is freedom of speech. I do not sacrifice freedom of speech to achieve diversity. In fact, I think this is the wrong attitude. If in the absence of freedom of speech, in the absence of people freely speaking up their mind, what you get is a superficial, curated form of diversity, but not a meaningful, deep, self-critical form of it, which is what you see in a lot of places. Did I speak enough, or do you want me to talk more?
No, that's great. I have so many questions. So many. Freedom of speech, we hear that term a lot, especially, sometimes coming from a conservative viewpoint. Something tells me that that's not how you think about it. So I'm curious for you, what does freedom of speech mean, generally speaking, but also with respect to the diversity you were just talking about?
I feel there's some deficiency in the way diversity is practiced in the West, because what diversity has come to mean is giving, let's say, token representatives of minority backgrounds platforms just to praise their background and their culture and their community. But they're not given platforms to criticize themselves. Which actually means that these people, the diverse people, what happens is that we are usually expected to be apologists or, propagandists for our cultures and communities, but not to go any deeper and to criticize our own communities. We're not allowed to criticize our communities when there's violence in our communities, whether violence against women or any other LGBT people or any other more minoritized people inside our communities. And what that ends up being, I see it basically in a global perspective. And I disagree with the fact that freedom of speech is what right-wing people use. Freedom of speech is for everyone to use. I would just ask you a question. If somebody comes to a place, to a meeting or a space wearing an inappropriate t-shirt with the wrong message, okay, so what's your next step? Are you going to now police people's clothing just for that one person who has abused that freedom? Or are you going to trust people to think that people can make their own mind? That's the odd person who will abuse their freedom, but we're not going to limit other people's freedom because of that. And I think that freedom is a positive thing. Just think about it that, freedom allows journalists, writers to write about difficult issues. And usually writers and journalists are ahead of their time. A lot of times things that they say even are not understood or appreciated by their peers. Think about the history of literature and books, how many books were banned, and now we consider them masterpieces. And why is that? Because they were ahead of their times. Even the most progressive people at that time did not consider those works safe enough. But, and I also think that, just look, so yes, freedom of speech is even for offensive speech, even for the speech that might make you uncomfortable. But then you can also use freedom of speech to answer it. So at our poetry night, Shab Sher, I always say the answer to a poem is another poem. So if someone writes a poem that you don't agree with, that's fine. You can also write your own poem and read it. We would love it. In fact, we've had experiences like that, where people with diametrically opposed views shared their poetry on our open mic or even as features. And then they spoke with each other very in a friendly manner, and they exchanged opinion like two adults and mature enough to engage in serious conversation. And I think one other problem with limiting people's freedom of speech is that it betrays it betrays the way we see the audience. We think that the audience is not mature enough to make their own mind. We think that the audience believes whatever they hear, but is that true? I don't believe so. I believe that human beings in general, most of them, can have a fairly good judgment if they're exposed to two different opposing views. And the other reason that I disagree with limiting freedom of speech is that it's even bad strategically. The progressives have always been in the minority, and they will always be in the minority. We're good at repelling people. We're not good at attracting people. But in order to attract people, you need to listen to them. You can't say, hey, you don't have the right to speak. I'm the only one who speaks. I'm the only one who knows the truth. Nobody will come to an event if they know their view is not at all represented. But in fact, at our place, people came, and over the years, I could see the change in them because they kept coming back. Even people who were very different from us, however you define us, they kept coming back because they heard things that they didn't hear anywhere else, and they knew that they were welcome to share their views as well. And nobody would sort of treat them with, let's say, deplatform them or, silence them. Again, I see that in a global perspective. The other problem is that the progressives here think that by limiting speech, they're favoring the minorities. I think it's the opposite. As a Muslim woman who comes from, Iran, I think actually, for example, limiting criticism of Islam has actually helped our dictators, because the dictators are very happy when you guys silence or censor us here. Guess what? In our countries, we face death, torture, imprisonment, and all kinds of things just because we want to criticize our culture or our religion inside our communities. Some of us will have to leave and come here. And here also we get censored. So what we end up having in the mainstream literary spaces here is all uncritical praise of Islam. But is that true? Does that anyone for a moment think that Islam is actually that good? No. None of you and none of the people who in words may support this view, in actuality, make their life decisions based on the fact that Islam is as good as they pretend it is. None of you will ever seriously think about immigrating to Saudi Arabia, Islamic Republic of Iran, or Afghanistan. None of you in your right mind will ever do that. So I think we end up actually being hypocritical. And hypocrisy, think about it. I don't think diversity should just make people pleased with themselves. Means that, of course, your Muslim friend would be uncomfortable, but that's the place where they should be. The place for literature is to tell the truth and make you uncomfortable, whoever you are, whatever identity you have, and if you're not ready to do the work and to criticize yourself and to hold your community to account, that community will never improve. And they will always think that we are good, we deserve a special treatment. But no, nobody deserves a special treatment. We're all humans capable of thinking and intellectual analysis. And we all need to be ready to do the hard work. Criticism is not like, I think diversity is not achieved through just me saying I'm good, you saying you are good, and so everybody is good. But nobody really connects with one another. Diversity is when you have the freedom to even say the wrong thing, because unless we say the wrong thing, we're not going to find the right thing. Freedom of speech helps us to exchange opinion. But if we get punished over and over, what we end up doing, we're having no speech at all, no thought at all. And that's what you find, especially in Canada. I always criticize the literature produced in Canada as being superficial, shallow, and not profound enough. And the reason being that, Canadians are afraid of speaking up. Even the best books about diversity come from the United States, which has the most robust freedom of speech laws. How is that? It's because people are able to debate different sides of an issue openly. They write, they give speeches, they engage each other in intellectual debates. And when they write books, the people who write, they have, the books come from a lot of conversations and a lot of situations where they have been with people who think differently from them. So they know the arguments and they develop them well enough. So I think what we need to, coming from the countries, a totalitarian theocracy, I can tell you that if you let go of freedom, you will let go of everything else that you have. The fact that you can wear your hair like this is because you are free. The fact that you can decide not to wear a cover on your head, it's because you are free. The fact that tomorrow you want to wear it, again, it's because you are free. Now, are we such children to let go of our freedoms just because it makes some of us uncomfortable? I think we need to hold those people who feel uncomfortable to account and ask them to behave like adults and not infantilize them. We are infantilizing people. In fact, a lot of minorities think that, well, I feel uncomfortable. So if you want to feel comfortable, you shouldn't go to poetry events, you shouldn't go to book events, you shouldn't go to any events, right? Don't talk to people, don't read anything. Stop your brain. But that's not the kind of world we want to live in, is that? I think for the wrong reason, there are two things that we need to make a decision about. The decision is between being nice or being truthful. And we can't be both. A lot of times we have to choose between the two. When you tell the truth to your friend, you look awful. They're not going to like it. But if you tell them, they will fix it, hopefully. Or maybe they end their friendship with you. But who wants that friend who's always offended by one thing or another, right?
Right. I want to touch a little bit. You mentioned, so again, I should probably preface to anyone who's listening, I actually virtually met Bänoo a few weeks ago. She was a guest speaker in my creative writing class. And I can't stop thinking about it. You said, I'm not going to say the whole thing because I would love for you to explain it further, but you were talking about how you encourage girls to write more poetry about politics and more boys to write poetry about love. And that's just kind of stuck with me. We didn't have all the time in the world when we met to talk about it. So I'd love for you to just dive into it now.
Yes. I think patriarchy has its hold all over the world. And well, in some cultures, it's much more prominent, like in ours. But in these cultures, there's the misconception that, women have achieved equal status. But if women have achieved equal status, that would require them to think about bigger issues. If women still, like the traditional women, define their life goal as being in a relationship, they will inevitably, if they become writers, they will write about what they find important. I think the women's world is still much more limited, even in the West, than men's world. Men, often if you go to, spoken word events, these are very competitive events. So people are scored by random strangers, like, who happen to be among the audience. So mostly it's men who are winners of slams, and it's because they write about politics. They write about bigger issues that should concern us all. But women mostly write about personal issues. But I'm not saying just write in a way to win slams, but I'm thinking that we need more women to think that they want to enter politics, more women who actually have it as their life goal to become leaders of one kind or another. But even today, even when you look, so I think as writers, we write about things that are most important for us. As I said, if the most important thing for you is money and, financial success, you will write about, I don't know, luxury, glamour, signs of status. If the most important goal you have is to just navigate the little circle that you have, you write about that little circle. But if your most important goal is peace on a global level, for example, then you will write about that. But of course, if you want to write about that, that's why I suggest women think about, it's boring to hear another young woman or another woman in general just writing another poem about heartbreak. Why do we expect women to write about love? And they always usually gratify us. It would be good for a change that women just think about other subjects, right? About war, about politics, about issues on a global level that they can fix, not about spirituality or personal relationships. And we also need to hold men to account that, all the responsibility for relationships, personal relationships, should not be put on the shoulders of women. If men really think relationships are important, they should think about that as well. And when you think about it, you will write about it. So we're far from balanced. And I can see this even in the writing community. I can see that the stereotypical expectations from men and women are still holding, even here, in a different way. Like, for example, if you go to a poetry open mic or any other open mic, men come and they immediately come and sign up. I've been running like close to 100 events by now. And I can tell you, I always have to convince women to sign up. And why should that be the case? Why doesn't a woman, when they come and they know they're going to an open mic, they don't think it's their space to take it? Women still have problems with taking space because they think about themselves as the way that patriarchy wants us to think about ourselves. We think about ourselves as commodities to be offered. So we see ourselves from outside. Oh, people will find fault with the way I look, with my body, with my hair, with my face, with the wrinkles, with the white hair. So what? Like it seems as if women also play into that thing. And so when you judge yourself for the deficiencies in your appearance and not for the deficiencies in your knowledge, that's what will happen, right? It would be very good to see women really, like women's deep thoughts would change, would be, I should read more books, I should get more actively involved, I should find a way to influence the society and change the society, rather than thinking all the time, oh, I have to dye my hair, Stop doing that, right? And all of this, I guess, impacts the way you write. And unfortunately, that means that women need to go into spaces with awareness of how they will be treated, so that they're prepared to stand against pitfalls or whatever that might happen. I actually had something that's out there. It's Immigrant Writers Manifesto. So for people who are new to a scene, any scene, it's not only immigrants. Even if you're famous in your little group and you want to go to another group, in which you are a stranger, you still have to pay attention to these rules. That if you really want to be professionally accepted in the art world, you really need to be aware of a lot of things, and go there with concentration and with determination. And of course, the love of the art that you are exploring.
I love how passionate you are about these issues. I think you have some really, really important things to say, and some really unique things to say as well. Thinking about, you know, feminism and the patriarchy, you know, I have, I guess, a couple questions. How would you define feminism? And I guess, you know, maybe what are the ultimate goals in feminism as you define them? But another question I have, you know, maybe even personally for me is, you know, what role can men play in feminism or fighting against the patriarchy?
Thank you. Well, I guess my definition of feminism is basically very similar to the dictionary definition. Feminism is a movement that aims at changing society in a way that women and men are treated equally, you know, in every possible way. Equally, not just in the eyes of the law, but equal in culture, equal as human, people with self-worth. And so feminism for me has always been, I think historically, over however many centuries or millennia human beings have been living on planet Earth, it seems that for most of our time living here, women have been reduced to only one function, that the biological function. So this reductionist approach to women has harmed them in ways that cannot be even explained. So for me, feminism is mostly a question of justice and dignity, which applies to both men and women and all genders. Because if the society is built in a way that women suffer from inferiority in different spheres of life and men suffer from superiority in many different spheres of life, it means that none of us are living in an equal society, and that harms both. It's like that men are little dictators in the little personal spheres, and even in work and in society, you know, wherever that you place people. And I believe that actually men should play a very important role in feminism. If you believe that humanity flourishes in equality, then that's your ethical responsibility to get involved. In fact, a lot of feminism over the, I guess, the last 20 or 30 years at least, a lot of men are actively involved in educating other men or educating the society at large about the importance of equality. It's, I guess, if I'm talking to both men and women, what can we do? I guess we all need to start from really soul searching to think that how do we see people of the other genders, and how do we see people of our own gender, and how do we see that in this world we relate to one another. The first step to really clarify this is to read the feminist classics, anything from The Second Sex to The Female Eunuch to The Feminine Mystique. These are all like classic texts, and many, many more than that. Kate Millett's Sexual Politics. I haven't named the others, but of course, Simone de Beauvoir, German Greer, and all these great classics. They take time for us to read and for us to digest them. We often read about them in other articles, but not the books themselves. And I think that the reason why these books are classics is that you cannot be the same. You will not be the same after reading them. And of course, you don't read books to just agree with people. You read books to have an opportunity to have a good in-depth conversation with someone who has thought about that issue, And then, of course, it's up to you to come up with your own version. Feminism has gone through many, many different, let's say, waves and different manifestations. But you will be your own type of feminist. And we need all the men who can join us. And you can see why. It's like, for example, no community can demand justice and can actually achieve justice just by themselves. Like civil rights movement needed non-Blacks to join. Women's movement needs non-women to join. Indigenous movement needs people who are not indigenous to join. Or LGBT people need people who are not identifying as LGBTQ plus to join. Because, I think one of the things that I want to highlight, which is very probably basic and boring, but I want you to just think about, is the end to all these social justice movements is humanity. Achieving humanity regardless of our differences. I should see you as a human. I shouldn't mind what you look like, positively or negatively. I should just connect with you with the human spirit and soul that you have. And this is the end goal, not that I treat you better or worse for the way you look. I should treat you as a fellow human, someone I can be friends with, someone I can exchange opinion and emotions with, and life experiences, and the same, and this richness is something that we are hoping to get. How beautiful the society would be if we just stopped categorizing each other and giving more opportunities to certain groups and less to others just because of the way they look, things that they don't have any power to control. We are all born with certain characteristics and we don't control them. Let's hope that we would actually reward those so-called, for lack of a better word, virtues that we each develop in ourselves, and value each other for what we have done, we have added to ourselves. Women, regardless of any other intersectional identities that you might consider, are still the biggest and most discriminated against minorities in the world. In every community, in every society, in every country, women are targeted. Women face misogyny and, discrimination. And of course, you can add other identities, but they face discrimination and injustice by even people from their own communities. And it's not only coming to them from outside, by unknown people. In fact, a lot of women who are the victims of domestic abuse are targeted by people from their own, the closest that they are the closest to them. And again, going back to what men can do. Yeah. Think about how world will improve. How much more, like the fact that now we're sitting together and we're talking, we are exchanging conversation. You have female colleagues and professors and women around with whom you exchange opinion, and you're challenged by their views, or you are inspired and you challenge them and you inspire them. This was all a feminist achievement. Women were not given equal opportunities for education. In fact, now in many countries, they're not. Like in Afghanistan, they're banned from going to junior high and high school and universities. And in Iran, a series of attacks have started against the schoolgirls. And we all think that our government's hand is involved in that. They're taking revenge because schoolgirls protested against the compulsory hijab, and now this is the way they are taking revenge.
Everything that you've been talking about, like kind of the isolation that women feel, not just in the literary world, but in a lot of aspects of life. It really reminds me of that Margaret Atwood poem, Male Fantasies. Can't recite the whole thing, but it's essentially like women live their life and like they know they're being watched by a man, and even when they're alone in their room, they're still like act like they're being watched. So I guess my question is, in your experience in the literary community, how has poetry and just creativity in general like created this community of not specifically women writers, but just how has finding that community where you feel empowered like helps with confidence, and how does that spiral into like social justice?
Okay, so I would explain that finding a community of women writers doesn't help empower you.
Okay.
You have to operate in the actually the diverse community. If you get comfortable only performing and exchanging ideas with fellow women, you will never be confident enough to speak in a mixed audience.
Okay.
And so what my suggestion would be is to actually go and explore all communities. Like, for example, when I came to Toronto, my window to world is through literature. So I found as many different poetry events, and I went there. Like I went to a poetry events where the majority were white and maybe 20 years older than me, 30 or 50 and 40 years older than me. I went to events where the majority were Black, and I was the only non-Black. I went to events where the majority were Jewish, and I was the only non-Jewish. I went to events where there were like the majority of people were South Asians. I went everywhere. I went to communities or events where like most people were 20 years younger than me. People who were my age, people, all kinds. And if there was an open mic, I shared, and I also deeply listened. And I learned a lot about communities. And what I found out was through this process that people are people. They're all human. They all are impressed positively by honesty, and are repelled by, the opposite qualities, right? So like oftentimes I would go and I would look around and I would say, okay, nobody in this, group seems to be like from my background. They're not immigrants, they're not from Iran, they're not Muslims. And my poem has a lot of things about these issues, but I feel the urge I want to share. I would share it and I would get the best response. And people would come and talk to me, and some of them are now my friends. So it's wrong to think that women would support you, to expect people who look like you to support you. You should expect people who think broadly to support you. And you should support everyone. Because, eventually the goal, if you are thinking about the context of creative writing and your goal is to become a writer one day, your work will be read by people who do not look like you. And so you need to write for everyone in the world. People whose politics is different from you. People whose lifestyle is different from you. People who look anything but you. Very different. And of course, people who look like you. But if you only expose yourself to this limited audience of women writers or group of women writers, what you have your worldview shrinks. So you think that the issues that these women explain, whatever they might be, are the only issues in the world. They're not. I love women, but I love strong women. And that is one of the other things. I've been running open mics. Again, I don't want to, stereotype, but this is what happens. A lot of women, especially when they become older, they never go to a place to explore a new event. Men keep going, even when they're older. So through this exploration, they find opportunities that women don't find. And then women complain, we don't find opportunities. You never go anywhere, my dear. You only go when you are featured. And that's the wrong time to go, because when you are featured, you're up there, everybody listens to you, but you don't listen to people, right? You also should go to places where you're just in the audience and just sit. And because, if you are a writer, you want to write for these people who are different from you. And so my advice for women is don't limit your literary activities to women only. And to men also, don't limit your activities to men only activities, if there are any places like that. But because, in fact, through coming to doing these explorations, and of course, reading helps, reading books that make you uncomfortable. I'm reading a book that from the very first few pages made me extremely uncomfortable. And I said, no, I very much disagree with this writer, but I'm keeping reading it. I keep reading it because I think I want to know, because this is a good writer and they explain things very well. They've thought about the issue. They have quite a lot of information and knowledge in this field. I want to know why they say what they say. And through women always go where they have guaranteed that they will be safe. Safety, I don't disagree with safety, but safety, has different definitions. Safety in the sense that, there should be no one in the environment who would harass people sexually or otherwise. This, yes, I will even throw these people out. But in terms of hearing ideas that you don't agree with, that I don't agree with. I think in this sense, we'll have to expose yourself to different opinions, because in the end, you will think when you're listening to someone who's saying something you don't agree with, your mind is thinking, how can I answer that, right? And so in the end, when you write, you're a better writer because you have included the opposite view in your writing as well, hopefully. And you keep reading, writing, and thinking. But if you only are going to places, so no women's writers only. In fact, go to places that are very different. Like women usually, when they grow older, there are fantastic women who do that. I know them, they come to Shabashir. But, it's interesting that to see the differences, again, characteristics of men and women. If you care about whatever field it is, it's your writing, you should go to every place writing is produced and performed. And if there is an open mic, you should add your voice. You should not wait for an extra invitation. If an event is open mic, it's open mic. Why does the host have to come to you and beg you? What if the host is busy at that moment, right? Why do you need extra? This is a question for me, right? And the more you do that, the more open mics you go to, and the more you force yourself, you say, okay, I'm going to this open mic, I'm bringing a poem, I'm going to read it. Don't think about it. You enter the room, where's the open mic sign up? You sign up and then you sit down. Then your name is, announced whenever it is announced. And this exercise of courage, it will help you a lot in the end. So go to places where you don't know anybody, especially. Don't always go with friends. Another problem. Usually people, it's good to go with friends. But what if your friend doesn't have time? Do you still want to be a good writer? What is more important? to be with your friends or to be an internationally famous writer. By the way, if you become an internationally famous writer, your friend will go with you everywhere you go. So, so prioritize your craft, prioritize your profession, because if you want to be a writer, you will be a professional writer. Whether your friend likes it or not, whether she has time for you or not, you will have time for your writing, right? So, and it's a very time-consuming thing, you know. And some other people think, you know, some people think that, especially with poetry, like maybe with fiction or other forms of writing, it's more like, you know, you publish a book, your publisher sells the book, and that's it. You don't even have to. And the time that you give public readings, you can just open the book and read from your book, and no connection with the audience, not looking up, nothing. This is how most fiction writers read. No offense, man, no disrespect. But with poets, you know, good poets especially, you know, we put a lot into it. We rehearse, we practice, we have eye contact. When we have audience interaction after the, like, you know, after the performance, all of this is part of it. Poetry is the language of the heart. You can't ignore people if you're a poet, right? So don't ignore building. And by the way, the other surprising thing is that if you go to many different places, you will develop friends. You know, when you enter a room, like imagine you're alone, you have entered a room, you know, at a poetry event or whatever. You look around the room, there are, you know, empty seats here and there. You want to decide where to sit. Do you pick a seat beside someone who looks the most similar to you? Or do you take a seat beside a person who looks the most different from you? Because guess what? That's the conversation you need to have.
Yeah, you know, I think maybe the last thing I got is I'm just looking at the time. Our audience is young people. What is one thing that you think young people should know in order to influence justice?
Wow, what a big question. Everyone that you face, everyone you love, you hate, you're indifferent to, is equally as human as you are. In the long run, there's only two options ahead of us. Either we need to fight people, silence them, kill them, put them in jail, or we need to talk to them. The decision is yours.